Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Today we continue on to episode 3 of our first season of our Clone Wars history series. In our last episode, the Battle of Geonosis was in full swing. A frenzied droid counterattack manages to delay the Grand Army of the Republic long enough for the Separatist leaders and the majority of their army to escape off the planet. Obi Wan Kenobi and young Anakin Skywalker break off from the attack to pursue Count Dooku and confront him for his crimes. Chapter 1, Tiddlywinkles.
Now, I must admit, I didn't think much of Anakin the first time I laid my eyes on him. Looked like a stiff breeze could blow him over. That was my first impression of the man. They said the boy had a temper, gone and killed an entire village of sand people, showed increasingly alarming behavior not fit for a Jedi. There's a Jedi like Anakin in every era of the Star Wars galaxy. The signs were obvious, yet for some reason, they had still not taken his lightsaber away.
It's important to understand just how much Anakin has changed as a Jedi due to his involvement in the Clone Wars. During the Battle of Geonosis, he was just a young Padawan, constantly losing his lightsaber and having trouble even fighting the weakest of opponents. A few years of constant warfare and he would become a killing machine. War and all the terrible things that come along with it force young men like Anakin to grow up sooner than they are prepared for.
Chapter 2, Dooku's Fall.
During the confrontation between Count Dooku, Obi Wan Kenobi, and Anakin Skywalker, the older Sith was able to easily dispatch the two younger Jedi. How was he able to do this? Well, before Dooku left the Jedi Order, he was actually considered one of the most skilled duelists in the entire Jedi Order. He is one of the few swordsmen that could keep up with Yoda, and he had even defeated Mace Windu once in a sparring session. This was a decade before the Battle of Geonosis. Dooku was now considerably older and probably past his prime. But Dooku was a practitioner of the second form of lightsaber combat. Known as the Way of the Ysalamiri or Makasi, very few Jedi actually used this form of lightsaber technique during the Clone Wars period because it was mainly designed for dueling other individuals wielding lightsabers. This form was more common during the Jedi-Sith Wars more than 1,000 years before the events of the Clone Wars. This is when massive armies of Force users would clash in gigantic epic battles. But now the Sith were in hiding and most of the enemies that the Jedi encountered usually used ranged weapons like blasters. So techniques like the defensive-minded Form 3 was much more popular. Individuals who mastered Form 3 were basically in constant motion, creating an impenetrable shield around themselves against enemy melee attacks and blaster fire. It was also a very efficient system to use against most other types of lightsaber combat. Form 3 was incredibly energy efficient and focused on redirecting an enemy's attack, and usually was designed to wear down more aggressive opponents. The Zen-like state of Form 3 was famously used by a more mature version of Obi Wan Kenobi later on in the war. Now, Count Dooku's Form 2 wasn't as practical on larger battlefields and against multiple assailants. But against a single opponent, Form 2 was extremely deadly and especially good at disarming opponents who got a bit out of hand. Form 2 also happened to be one of the few lightsaber techniques that worked against Form 3. Makasi was all about finesse, but like Form 3, it was also about minimal effort. While the slashes and lunges of Form 2 lacked kinetic energy, the attack could be sustained indefinitely and left very few openings for the counterattacks that Form 3 relied on.
Chapter 3, Obi-Wan's Phone.
Interestingly enough, Obi Wan Kenobi comes out of the gate swinging at Count Dooku, a tactic he used with great success against Darth Maul. It was a risky gamble at the time. Obi Wan Kenobi was just a Padawan, and his master Qui-Gon Jinn, a skilled swordsman, had been easily taken down by the Sith Dathomiri. Maul, who was perhaps a bit too overconfident from his last victory, expected the young Padawan to go down without a fight, and to be very hesitant and maybe fall into a more careful and defensive routine like the basic Form 1 or Form 3. But instead, Obi-Wan Kenobi used Form 4, Ataru, known for powerful strikes and aerobatic movements supplemented by the Force. The idea was to overwhelm the enemy with brute force and then once they're off balance, exploit that opening. It was the form Qui-Gon Jinn favored, and it had just led to his death moments before, but it still worked quite well for Obi-Wan against Maul because the Sith did not see it coming. And also his own form, Form 7, was extremely aggressive and relied on him taking the initiative. It was not a very defensively capable form. But this time on Geonosis against Count Dooku, Obi Wan Kenobi's attacks just looked sloppy. For one, Obi-Wan Kenobi has never been a terrific offensive fighter. He was an extremely capable defensive fighter and was one of the few individuals who could go up against General Grievous, who sometimes used up to 4 lightsabers at a time. But this offensive ruse he used against Count Dooku lacked the weight and power necessary for a true Ataru form. Therefore, the Count was able to casually flick Obi-Wan's power strikes to the side, and he ultimately defeats him with some quick, calculated slashes. Obviously, Anakin rushing headfirst into a wall of pain and lightning probably messed up the Jedi's plan. Had the two of them gone against Count Dooku together, Obi-Wan Kenobi probably would have adopted a more cautious Form 3 from the beginning. Meanwhile, a few kilometers away, Padme awakens from a pretty nasty fall out of a LAAT. She had hit her head quite hard on some sand, and little did she know, a small blood clot started forming in the base of her brain that would eventually grow large enough to kill her 4 years later. I'm just joking, that's not actually canon. She actually does die from heartbreak. That or Palpatine explodes her heart from long distance. Not really sure.
Chapter 4, Anakin's Form.
Meanwhile, Anakin is also able to wake up just in time to save his master with an aggressive Form 4 parry he uses by channeling his inner rage. But then Obi-Wan Kenobi gives Anakin his lightsaber and the Padawan switches to Form 6, known as the Diplomat form. It was a more simple and easier style that was preferred by less combat-oriented Jedi, and it was also a pretty good basic form for those not used to fighting with 2 weapons. Ultimately, it just brought Anakin a few seconds, as Count Dooku was able to immediately cut one of Anakin's lightsabers in half, forcing him back to wielding a single lightsaber in Form 5. Anakin loved using the 5th form of lightsaber combat, which was based off of his master's Form 3. Form 5 was basically created by masters who thought Form 3 lacked offensive capability. Therefore, it was a well-balanced form that was preferred by larger individuals as it focused less on movement and agility and more on power strikes. Although Anakin seems more confident in his preferred style, Count Dooku's Form 2 was also well-suited against this form, and the more experienced duelist quickly disarms Anakin when he sees an opening.
Chapter 5, Master vs. Padawan.
At this point, Yoda arrives to confront Count Dooku. What a lot of people don't realize about this battle is that although Yoda has at one time interacted and trained with most of the Jedi Knights in the Order, Count Dooku once upon a time was Yoda's Padawan. While an individual like Yoda, who is almost a millennia old, probably had dozens if not hundreds of Padawan, Count Dooku was probably one of the only Jedi Yoda ever lost. The young Count, who actually looked a lot like the real-life Sith Lord Darth Cage, had caught the interest of Yoda, who sensed much promise and potential in the young boy. Their relationship was similar to that of a father and a son, which was pretty typical for most masters and Padawans. Later in the war, when Yoda is tested by the mysterious Force Priestess, Yoda is tempted with a false version of reality where he sees Count Dooku if he had stayed in the Jedi Order. The loss of Dooku is clearly something that is present in Yoda's subconscious. Such as it is, this would be the first time that Yoda has seen Count Dooku since he left the Order. Yoda senses that his former Padawan has changed and become a more formidable foe despite his advancing age.
Powerful you have become, Dooku.
I've become more powerful than any Jedi. Even you.
Yet he was still able to batter away Dooku's telekinesis attack and even casually absorbs his Sith lightning. This really sets the tone for this battle. The newly anointed Sith Lord was still just a learner in the face of a true master of the Force. Sensing that defeating Yoda in a force power battle was futile, Dooku decides to fall back on his swordsmanship once again. The one thing I really can't stress enough was how terrific of a swordsman Count Dooku was. He fully understood the problems with Form 2, mainly the lack of powerful kinetic strikes. Everything in Form 2 was about precision stabs and slashes that were designed to go around a defender's guard rather than breaking it. Now, Dooku's personal philosophy was that a Jedi who dabbled in too many different types of lightsaber combat would never become a master of one. But in practice, Dooku had once been one of the best lightsaber instructors in the academy and was well versed in all the different styles. During his previous duel, he actually imitates Anakin's Form 5 with the classic Gem So over the head defensive position. And against Yoda, Dooku starts his attack with a Force-assisted Form 4 jumping attack to match Yoda's own Atura form. Now, Count Dooku was an incredibly competitive individual, and one of the ways he would compete would be to taunt his opponents by using their form against them. His ability to fluidly switch back to Form 2 when his opponent was off guard helped him keep the element of surprise on his side and dictate the flow of battle. The problem was few Jedi were able to match Yoda's power and speed and experience. He was also incredibly small and therefore very hard to hit. He's basically Oddjob from GoldenEye. It's just not fair. Seeing that Yoda would be too difficult to defeat, Count Dooku creates a diversion and escapes.
Chapter 6: Aftermath.
Ultimately, despite having dispatched Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi with very little effort, you could tell the Count was tired. He was quite old for a human and lacked the stamina he once had. Using Form 2 did help mask his age, but ultimately he wasn't as powerful as Yoda and he lacked the stamina to sustain longer duels, something that would haunt him in later duels. Getting schooled by Count Dooku would also make Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin much better duelists as well. As Obi-Wan Kenobi got older, he would continue training in Form 3 until his defensive form became impenetrable. This made Obi-Wan Kenobi's defensive form almost second nature. It allowed him time to think and strategize during the middle of a battle. And Obi-Wan Kenobi was not above using his environment to get an upper hand on his enemy, and he would eventually develop a higher understanding for the art of dueling. Anakin Skywalker, on the other hand, despite losing his other hand, would continue to learn how to dual-wield weapons. Ultimately, as he became stronger and more willing to tap into his emotions, his Form 5 would become quite impressive. Anakin's unparalleled power in the Force would allow him to dominate the battle with increasingly powerful Gemso attacks. With the battle finally over, the reality of the situation finally sets in. The Grand Army of the Republic was decimated. Of the 200,000 clones that entered the battle, only 75,000 were deemed still fit for combat. The Separatist droid army, as we mentioned in our last episode, managed to escape mostly intact and began opening up new fronts across the galaxy. The Republic forces did manage to seize control of the Separatist command center along with the droid foundries, but with only a few tens of thousands of troops active, the survivors of Geonosis needed to be regrouped into new units and quickly deployed elsewhere. The Republic's priority was now to get as many new clones from Kamino equipped and combat ready. The small garrison left on Geonosis would ultimately be overwhelmed within just a few weeks. Due to Yoda's intervention, Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi had not died, which was important for the Jedi as they would play a big role in the Clone Wars. When Obi-Wan Kenobi was in captivity, Count Dooku had mentioned a hidden Sith Lord to him in an effort to recruit the Jedi to his cause. Upon telling the Council about this, an investigation was opened to find out who the Sith Lord was. Boba Fett, having witnessed his father's death, buries the bounty hunter and begins planning his revenge against Mace Windu. Mace Windu, on the other hand, regrets killing the bounty hunter without hesitation, and at the same time regrets not taking out Count Dooku when he had a chance. So there you have it, guys. That is the end of episode 3. If you want to check out the rest of our series, we've placed everything into a playlist, which you can hit in the top right corner. Also, we have a small series of basically prequel videos where we talk about kind of the events leading up to the Clone Wars, so check it out over there. Also, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan. Thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.